First stop today is the Bluffton University Nature Preserve. We should have a variety of habitats here ranging from woodlands, riparian zones, lentic and lotic systems, vernal pools, quite a bit for us to see today. Starting out with an oldie but goodie, one that you should remember. This is your honey locust. It's got some fruits on it, anachronistic in nature. This particular tree, we can see, has some pretty impressive thorns on it. This is a native tree that likes disturbed habitats. This is your hawthorn. See some of the leaves just starting to emerge out on this individual. Alternate nature, toothed at the edges. Restored habitat might not seem like much, but these types of boxes are good for our bluebirds. Our bluebirds in natural habitats have often been displaced by the terrible European starlings, which actually displace their nest in natural habitat. If you build bluebird boxes, you have to be really careful in terms of the size, the opening that you make in the bird box, so that only the bluebirds get in and the starlings cannot. We move our way into the side here. We see the leftover fruits from a milkweed plant. These are the fruits. They're capsules which split open, and you can see some of the remnant seeds, which are light and fluffy in nature, kind of cottony like, that are dispersed via the wind. Milkweed is a really critical native plant, and this is common milkweed, but it's important because this is where monarch butterflies lay their eggs, and it's where their caterpillars feed until they're able to develop into the butterfly form. So it's really important that you plant, if you have the ability to plant this in your yard, so that the monarchs, as they migrate back and forth, have an opportunity to lay their eggs, and also plant native wildflowers so that the adults have nectar to feed on. Some man-eating poison ivy vines growing up this old Austrian pine. You can also see where the woodpeckers have gone ahead and started going into the bark, trying to get any of the insects that have begun colonizing the dead wood on this particular individual. Delightful hackberry, corky ridged bark, a little bit of poison ivy starting to grow up the sides. Really good view of the cork ridge on these particular individuals. Kind of a transitional habitat. We have a second growth forest here, also coming up on an old pine plantation. The conifers within this are eastern white pines, probably planted in the past as an area to eventually be timbered for their lumber, but they weren't. When these plantations are planted, oftentimes the trees are too close together and they don't reach the maturity, the size that they do in their native habitat that we find in the northeastern part of the state. We also, over here, as we come down and take a look at, we've got nice little spring beauties coming into bloom here, and awesome little tiny Ohio buckeye with its really cool palmately compound leaves that we see here, fully emerged. Probably get a little bit larger than what we see in this initial sprout out. A couple days of heavy rains have left this path and much of the surrounding landscape pretty saturated. So a little refreshing water fill on our vernal pools. Big carpet of spring beauties coming out. We also have some Some wild onions emerging, quite tall, probably getting ready to go into flower. Remember, once again, these guys have characteristic bulbs associated with them. Maybe. I'm not getting any luck, but remember, the onion family has the characteristic smell associated with them.
Can I try?
On this fence row here, we have another emerging Ohio buckeye, and this one not only has its leaves out, cool palmately compound leaves, but it's also at the tips getting ready to flower. And this is where the iconic buckeye fruits will be produced. And the Ohio buckeyes have showy flowers, and they produce kind of a spiny fruit. And the term buckeye comes from the seed, which has the light spot associated with it. And some people think it looks like a deer or a buck's eye. These are poisonous. In fact, many parts of the tree are poisonous. But definitely don't eat the seeds from this. The chocolate and peanut butter ones, though, are quite edible. Coming up on an edge habitat here as we transition from a forest regrowth into an open field, and in these edge habitats we often have certain organisms like we see here. This is one of several entrances that a local groundhog or woodchuck has made. I'm trying to make my way through the Molliflora rose. Looks like another entrance over here. Sometimes when these excellent excavators are too close to human projects, houses, impoundments, they can be problematic. We're going to enter into this open field area, this grassland habitat that looks to be mowed probably once or twice a year, and make our way across the field to the riparian zone and a forest regrowth. Easily one of the more obnoxious invasive species that we have. Invasive species, especially in the terms of trees and shrubs, tend to leaf out before our native species, with the exception of the buckeye. And this is an amber honeysuckle that's starting to come out. Beautiful flowers, that's probably why it was first planted in the area. They form these shrubs, multiple stems emerging from the base, with kind of long stringy bark, but they're aggressive. The fruits are spread by birds, and they actually release compounds into the soil that prevent our native species from developing and growing. So they're extremely good competitors. Deer don't browse on them at all, so they're a big problem in our forest stands, especially when you get to some places down south. They've completely overwhelmed our understory of trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants. So should be removed, cut it at the base, put a little bit of Roundup straight up on that fresh cut, and that should take it out. But it's a lot of work to keep up with these guys. Coming up on a pretty good sized vernal pool. We'll pause a little bit outside of it and listen to the call of the American toad. The trill is the males once again calling to the females during the breeding season. Part of today's trip that people either love or hate, the swinging bridge component. So hang on to your gear and take your time getting across. See, the river's a little bit high. Once again, a lot of rain over the past 2 nights. Some people are enthusiastic, others are less so when crossing this engineering marvel. So not quite above flood stage. You can see that The water is right up at the bank tip. You can see in this side over here, you can see where the water is just about ready to crest. It probably won't. It'll start receding here. So, but it give you kind of an extreme example once again of the cutting and erosional nature. If you look on this side here, you can see the steeper cut bank. And over to this side, you can see the less shallow depositional floodplain zone on this Riley Creek. All right, we're on the banks of the Riley Creek here. One of the cool spring wildflowers. We've seen the leaves of this before. These are the mottled leaves of the trout lily, but we actually have the yellow flower emerging, so this makes it very simply the yellow trout lily. Notice how the flower hangs upside down and the petals recurve during the day. This creates an umbrella-like appearance, and it's designed to keep water from stripping away the limited amount of pollen that it produces. So it has a close relative, a sister species, the white trout lily, that we don't see today. We can also see very close by delightful spring beauties, delectable ramps, another very cool yellow trout lily. As we move up here, there's a different white flower that we haven't seen before. This individual right here. Also come up a little bit farther. This is rue anemone. Has a yellow stamen, yellow center disc, highly divided leaves, and usually 8 white petals. This is a member of the buttercup family. Little mayapple starting to emerge there. And this bloodroot has already finished flowering. You have the really cool, persistent lobed leaf here that will be around most of the growing season. And you can see the developing fruit where the white flower used to be located. As I said, this is a really cool little location with lots and lots of different spring ephemerals coming up through the forest floor. Back up the top of this ridge, we still have some fewer spring ephemerals, some yellow trout lilies coming up, but we want to take a look at this really nice American beech specimen. You can see the flared or buttressed trunk and the smooth gray bark associated with this large mature individual. And you can see some of its smaller progeny most likely off to the side, such as this one here that's still retaining its leaves. We're in the heart of the floodplain, the riparian forest here. This is a pretty well developed forest, riparian wise. You can see a lot of mature species, like this cottonwood in front of us, that's capable of handling these saturated soil conditions. I'd also bring to your attention that, notice that the spacing of the trees is very different than what we saw in that young successional hawthorn dominated forest edge earlier in today's trip. And at this time of year, you can look around and usually, without much difficulty, anything leafing out green is going to be an invasive species. And in this particular location, the majority of what we're seeing green-wise is that Amur honeysuckle and Molliflora rose are the 2 species within the forest habitat that are problematic. You can also hear the massive numbers of toads still trilling. This cool individual is a really massively sized Osage orange, and a lot of these anachronistic plants have backup plans for survival if they've lost their dispersers. And some of these plants, like the pawpaw and the Osage orange, have the ability to send these underground runners. And so if you look for the dot right here, you can see this is the older individual right here. Pretty good circumference on this trunk, and then you can see the interconnected individuals as we go out. Here's another one. You can see this rhizome connecting. There's another one right here. And then you have some smaller individuals coming off the end that are much younger. It's kind of an interesting strategy of survival for the Osage orange tree. But this is a good sized individual. Really mucky going through here today. So it's been pretty quiet. A lot of toads, red-winged blackbirds, some woodpeckers calling, but generally speaking pretty quiet at this time of the day. But we're out later in the afternoon. Good sized swamp white oak right here. See the base, you have an extensive amount of heart rot. So the inside of this tree has pretty much disappeared, been consumed most likely by fungi, but the tree is still alive because the outer living part is still thriving on this individual. Middle Eastern red cedar and Ohio buckeye sapling, waging warfare with the invasive honeysuckle that has sprouted up all around them. Hang in there, guys. Coming up on a small patch of conifers over here. Come on up and take a look and see who we have growing. Yellow flowering bush is a Forsythia, introduced, semi-problematic as an invasive species in some southern parts of the state. Soft needles here, bundles of 5. Should remember that's your eastern white pine. This individual here with small needles that are overlapping in scales. This is going to be your eastern red cedar. Rotate around here a little bit. And this guy who's not looking so good, this is an Austrian pine with 2 large needles per bundle, pretty stiff, rigid in nature. This guy is overtaken. You can see some good tendrils here by the wild grape that's growing up it. This is their anchor point that allows these vines to attach and secure. We're looking at a species of aspen. This is a big tooth aspen. You can look up and you can see the dangling structures are the male catkins putting pollen out right now. The big tooth aspen gets its name from these leaves that we can see here. Specifically, as you take a close look at these leaves, you can see the big teeth or jagged edges along the periphery or edge of the leaf itself. Aspen are interesting because they often spread via these underground stems that you can see right here. This is its rhizome. And the interesting thing is in this particular stand, there are probably 50 to 60 quaking aspen trunks or stems up. And they're probably all related to one individual, interconnected underground, creating this colony of genetically identical individuals. This is an extreme example of what we saw earlier with the Osage orange.
Dad.
Good mussel beach and pretty nice sized vernal pool in the middle of this forest stand. Gets a lot of sunlight, probably a lot of algal growth in it. And we also see that it has a cloudy or turbid disposition, probably due to the rains and then also tannin relief from the leaves decomposing in the base of it. Pretty quiet from a frog standpoint. Didn't hear anything coming up on this one.